To claim his inheritance, Millionaire marries a stranger. Then, love changes the rules. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It all began on a gray morning in New York City. The sound of rain tapping against the office windows matched the ticking of the clock on the wall each second, reminding Ethan Blake how little time he had left. The letter from his late father's attorney lay open on the desk, its words as sharp as any blade. To inherit the Blake Corporation, the heir must be legally married by his 30th birthday. Ethan's birthday was 10 days away. He leaned back in his leather chair, jaw tight, eyes cold. The empire he had built was about to be stripped from him because of one outdated clause. He had the brains, the discipline, and the numbers to prove his worth, but not the one thing the will demanded: a wife. His assistant, Mark, stood nervously by the door. "Sir, there are other ways. The board might—" Ethan cut him off. "The board wants blood, not reason. If I am not married by next week, everything goes to the charity trust." He exhaled sharply, then stared at the city skyline beyond the glass. "Find me someone. Someone ordinary, discreet. No scandals, no attachments. I just need a signature." That afternoon, fate brought him to a small cafe, tucked between two bookstores, a place he would have normally walked past without noticing. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and burnt coffee, and a young woman was arguing quietly with the barista about an unpaid check. Her name was Maya Hart, 26, exhausted from working double shifts. Her mother's hospital bills piling higher every week. The cafe manager's voice rose in frustration. "Maya, this is the third time. I cannot keep holding your paychecks." Maya bit her lip, her hands trembling as she counted the crumpled bills in her pocket. "Please, just until Friday. My mom's—" "Enough excuses," he snapped. From the corner table, Ethan watched in silence. There was something about her defiant, yet fragile. The way she stood her ground despite the humiliation. The way her voice cracked but never broke. When she turned to leave, he rose and blocked her path. "Wait," he said simply. She looked up, startled. The man before her was sharply dressed, with the kind of calm authority that did not need to be announced. "Do I know you?" she asked. "No," Ethan said, "but I have an offer that might change your life." Maya frowned. "Is this some kind of joke?" He met her gaze, steady and unblinking. "Marry me. Think of it as a contract." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The cafe noise faded. Only the sound of her quickened breath filled the air. "You are out of your mind," she whispered. "Maybe," he replied calmly. "But it is a legal marriage, not a romance. You would be compensated. $100,000, paid at the end of 6 months. No strings attached. You help me keep my company. I help you pay your mother's bills." Maya stared at him, speechless. "You cannot be serious." Ethan reached into his coat pocket and placed a sleek black card on the table between them. "Think about it. I need an answer by tomorrow." He turned and walked out, leaving her standing in the faint smell of coffee and disbelief. That night, as Maya sat beside her mother's hospital bed, the offer echoed in her mind. She looked at the unpaid invoices, the overdue rent notice, the fear in her mother's tired eyes, and felt her heart sink. Maybe it was crazy. Maybe it was wrong. But maybe it was the only way. The next morning, Ethan's assistant entered the office. "Sir, she is here." Ethan looked up from his desk. "Send her in." Maya stepped through the door, her second-hand coat damp from the rain. Her eyes met his with quiet determination. "I will do it," she said. "But on one condition." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" "I want everything in writing," she said firmly. "Every rule, every promise, no tricks." A slow smile crossed his lips. "Good," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Because I like people who understand the value of a deal." And with that, the contract marriage began cold, calculated, and built on everything except love, or so they both thought. The next morning, Ethan Blake stood inside the marble hall of his penthouse. the contract folder resting on the table like a silent challenge. When Maya arrived, her small figure seemed out of place against the glass walls and polished floors. The city stretched endlessly behind her reflection, glittering and distant. He gestured for her to sit. "You understand what you are agreeing to?" Maya nodded slowly. 6 months. Appearances only. No real marriage. No expectations. Ethan opened the folder and slid a pen toward her. 4 conditions, he said evenly. You will attend 5 public events as my wife. You will not discuss our arrangement with anyone. You will not interfere with my work or personal life. And when 6 months end, we sign a quiet annulment and go our separate ways. Maya read the papers line by line, her eyes catching on the typed words, legally binding. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached the final page. And the payment? Transferred upon completion, Ethan replied. $100,000, plus medical expenses for your mother. And, she hesitated for a long moment. Then she lifted the pen, signed her name, and whispered, "Done." Ethan's signature followed, smooth and deliberate. The sound of the pen against paper sealed both of their fates. 2 days later, they stood before a quiet officiant in a private courthouse. No flowers, no music, no family, just 2 strangers exchanging vows written for convenience. When the words, "You may now kiss the bride," echoed softly, Ethan merely brushed his lips against her forehead. It was not romance, it was an agreement. As they left the courthouse, the rain had returned, thin and cold. Ethan's driver opened the door of a sleek black car. Maya hesitated before stepping inside. "So this is it," she murmured. "This is the start," he corrected. "Welcome to the arrangement." The drive to his mansion felt endless. The estate was a fortress of wealth, gated, silent, too perfect. When the doors opened, servants lined the hall, their expressions trained to hide curiosity. Maya's worn shoes made no sound on the marble floor. She felt like a ghost wandering into someone else's life. Ethan turned to her briefly. "You will have your own room. Dinners are at 7. My staff will handle your schedule for events." Maya forced a nod. Understood. Her bedroom overlooked the garden. The view was breathtaking, but the air inside was cold. She unpacked a single suitcase, plain dresses, a few books, and an old necklace that once belonged to her mother. She held it tightly before hanging it by the window, whispering, "I will survive this." That night, the dining table stretched long between them. The meal was silent except for the soft clink of silverware. Maya tried to speak once. "You do not talk much, do you?" Ethan did not look up. Talking rarely fixes anything. "Well," she said, a faint smile breaking through, "it makes time less heavy." He almost smiled but stopped himself. "Eat. You will need energy. Tomorrow you meet the board." "Oh." The next morning, Maya entered the conference hall, wearing a simple ivory dress chosen by his stylist. The room was filled with shareholders, reporters, and whispers. Ethan stood beside her, flawless in a dark suit. When someone asked how they met, Maya froze, but then something instinctive took over. She smiled, reached for Ethan's arm, and said, "We met by accident. I spilled coffee on him, and he offered me a napkin instead of anger. I suppose that was the start." So. Laughter rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Ethan looked down at her, surprised. Her lie was effortless, warm, believable. For the first time, she was protecting him, not herself. Later, in the car, he said quietly, "That story was quick thinking." Maya looked out the window. "You are welcome. I know what it is like to be judged." He studied her profile, the way her hair caught the sunlight, the quiet strength in her tone. "You are different from what I expected," he said. She turned to him. "And what did you expect?" "Someone who would treat this as a transaction," he answered. She smiled faintly. "I did. But I am also trying to be human about it." For a moment, the coldness between them thinned. The city lights reflected in the car window like scattered stars, and neither of them spoke again until they reached home. That night, as Maya stood alone on the balcony, the wind carried the scent of rain. Inside, Ethan watched her through the glass. She looked fragile, but something about her presence filled the empty mansion with a quiet pulse of life. He turned away before she could notice, telling himself it was only curiosity. But deep down, something had already begun to shift, a small fracture in the wall he had built around his heart. And for the first time since the contract began, Ethan Blake realized that the rules he had written so carefully might not be the ones that would last. The first week of their arrangement passed in uneasy silence. The mansion was full of sound, the ticking of clocks, the soft footsteps of staff, the constant hum of wealth, but inside, it felt empty. Ethan buried himself in meetings, while Maya learned to move quietly, unnoticed, like another piece of furniture in his polished life. But everything changed on the night of the foundation gala. Ethan's assistant reminded him that the charity event was the first official appearance of Mr. and Mrs. Blake. "The press will be watching," he warned. "If she slips, the story breaks." Ethan's reply was calm. "She will not." That evening, the mansion turned into a preparation ground. A stylist team surrounded Maya, zipping and pinning, transforming her from a quiet woman into a vision of elegance. The dress was midnight blue, smooth satin that caught the light like water. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she almost did not recognize the reflection. Ethan appeared in the doorway, already dressed in black tie, his cufflinks shining under the chandelier. His gaze lingered a moment longer than usual. "You clean up well," he said simply. Maya's lips curved slightly. "So do you, Mr. Blake." The car ride to the hotel ballroom was silent except for the faint hum of jazz on the radio. When they arrived, flashes from cameras burst like lightning. Maya froze for half a second. Ethan noticed and placed his hand lightly on her back, guiding her through the crowd. "Smile," he murmured. "You are supposed to look like you belong here." Inside, the room glittered with gold and crystal. Business tycoons, investors, and reporters swirled in elegant conversations. Maya moved carefully beside him, remembering every rule the etiquette coach had drilled into her. She nodded, smiled, and said little. But when one of the older shareholders leaned toward her and said with a sneer, "You must be very proud of your rapid success," the tension hit her chest like a slap. She felt the sting of humiliation rising, the same feeling she had known all her life, people assuming she did not deserve to stand where she was. She took a steady breath and replied softly, "Proud, yes. Success rarely comes overnight. Sometimes it takes surviving what others never see." The man blinked, caught off guard. Around them, a few guests murmured in surprise. Ethan watched silently, a faint flicker of admiration crossing his face. Later, when she walked to the bar to take a glass of water, a reporter intercepted her. "Mrs. Blake, how did you and your husband meet?" "Rumor says it was arranged." Maya's mind raced. Cameras hovered. She forced a gentle smile. "We met because fate decided two opposites could make one balance. He is all logic, and I am all heart. Maybe that is why it works." The reporter laughed, charmed by her answer. "That is very poetic." Ethan joined them at that moment, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "My wife always knows what to say," he said with quiet pride. When they returned to the table, Maya whispered, "Did I do well enough?" Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. "You did more than that. You saved tonight." For the first time, she saw something soften behind his steady expression, something almost human. After the gala, the car ride home was peaceful. Outside, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold. Ethan removed his tie, resting back in his seat. "You handled yourself with grace," he said. "The board will be pleased." Maya glanced at him. "I was not trying to please them." "Then who?" he asked. She looked out the window. "Myself." He nodded slowly. "Then you should be proud." That night, when they reached the mansion, Maya stepped out of the car, her heels clicking on the stone path. The air smelled faintly of rain and roses. Ethan paused beside her, hesitating for a second before saying quietly, "You made tonight easier." Maya met his eyes, surprised. "You almost sound like you are thanking me." "Do not get used to it," he said, but there was warmth beneath the words. As she turned to go inside, the wind caught the edge of her shawl. Ethan reached out instinctively, his hand brushing against her arm. It was the first real touch between them that was not part of an act. They both froze, the moment fragile and unspoken. Then he stepped back. "Good night, Mrs. Blake." "Good night, Mr. Blake," she whispered. Later, in her room, Maya removed the jewelry and makeup, staring at her bare face in the mirror. For the first time, she wondered if she was pretending for the world or for herself. In the quiet of the next morning, she found a small envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a note written in Ethan's precise handwriting. "You were right. Talking does make time less heavy." Maya smiled faintly, pressing the paper to her heart. The contract marriage had begun as business, but somewhere between the silence and the glimmer of trust, something unfamiliar had started to take root. Neither of them knew it yet, but the rules they had built were already beginning to crack. Weeks turned into a quiet rhythm inside the Blake mansion. The press no longer questioned their marriage. Photos from the gala had painted a perfect picture of elegance and harmony. To the outside world, Ethan and Maya were a power couple. Inside the glass walls of the penthouse, however, they were still two strangers bound by ink and obligation. Ethan spent most days locked in meetings, his voice calm but his eyes heavy with pressure. The company's board had grown restless, questioning his leadership and hinting at the possibility of replacing him once the inheritance clause expired. He worked harder, spoke less, and built walls higher than before. Maya noticed the exhaustion in his movements, the late nights, the untouched dinners, the way he rubbed his temples when he thought no one was looking. One evening, she knocked on the door of his study, holding a cup of coffee. "You have not eaten all day," she said gently. He looked up, surprised. "I am fine." "You are not," she replied. "You forget that the body can only run on pride for so long." For a moment he almost smiled. "You are dangerously honest, Mrs. Blake. It is the only thing I have ever been good at," she said softly. She placed the cup on his desk and turned to leave. "Maya," he called after her. "Thank you." The word was simple, but it lingered. That night, the city outside their windows glittered with rain. Ethan stood on the balcony, looking at the skyline. Maya joined him quietly, a shawl around her shoulders. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet concrete. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked. "What does?" "Being the one everyone looks at but no one really knows." He hesitated. "No, you just learn to hide better." They stood in silence for a long time, the city humming below. When she shivered, he removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "You will get sick," he said. She looked at him, eyes reflecting the city lights. "You are breaking one of your own rules." "Which one?" "The one about keeping your distance." He said nothing, but neither did he take the jacket back. The next morning, gossip columns began speculating that their marriage was turning into a real romance. A photo of them at the balcony had been taken by a distant lens, Ethan's jacket over her shoulders, her smile soft in the night. The article's title read, "From Contract to Connection? The Blakes Spark, Rumors of Love." Ethan threw the magazine onto his desk. "This is exactly what I wanted to avoid," he muttered. Maya stood nearby, unsure whether to speak. It was just a photo. "In this world, one photo can become a story," he said coldly. "And stories destroy reputations." Her heart sank. "I did not ask for attention. I only stood beside you." His tone softened. "I know. I am not blaming you." He sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I just do not know how to keep control anymore." Maya looked at him carefully. "Maybe control is not what you need, Ethan. Maybe what you need is to stop fighting everyone." He met her eyes, a faint spark of frustration mixing with something deeper. "And let them win? No," she said quietly. "Let yourself breathe." That night, he did not eat alone. For the first time, they shared dinner without tension. Maya talked about her mother's recovery, about her dreams before life turned difficult. Ethan listened, genuinely listened. When she spoke of her love for painting, he leaned forward. "You paint?" "Used to," she said with a smile. "I stopped when survival became a full-time job. Maybe you should start again." She laughed lightly. "Maybe I should remind myself what happiness feels like first." He looked at her for a long time. "You might be better at reminding others." "Oh?" A soft silence followed. For the first time, laughter replaced the echo of distance between them. But just as warmth began to settle, the world outside their fragile peace started to stir. That weekend, Ethan's assistant entered his office with a grim expression. "Sir, the CFO requested an emergency meeting. She claims there are irregularities in your marriage documents." Ethan frowned. "Irregularities?" The assistant nodded. "Rebecca says she intends to present evidence to the board that your marriage is fake." Maya, standing near the doorway, felt the color drain from her face. The contract that had saved them might now become the very weapon used to destroy them. Ethan's eyes darkened. Then she just declared war. He turned toward Maya, his voice steady but his jaw tight. Whatever happens next, do not say a word to anyone. Not yet. Maya met his gaze and nodded, fear and faith battling inside her chest. The walls around them, once built to protect a secret, were beginning to close in. And for the first time, Ethan realized the fight ahead was not about business anymore. It was about trust. The following days at the Blake Corporation were tense and heavy. Rumors spread through every floor like wildfire. Employees whispered that the marriage between Ethan and Maya was nothing but a business trick, a staged act to keep his inheritance. By Monday morning, the boardroom felt like a courtroom. Rebecca, the CFO, sat across from Ethan with a thin smile. "You have built an empire on lies," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Photographs, testimonies, and a timeline that proves this so-called marriage was arranged purely for the will." The board members exchanged glances. Ethan remained calm, his face unreadable. "You have done your research," he said evenly. "But what you have are assumptions, not evidence." Rebecca leaned forward. "The company cannot afford a scandal. If the truth reaches investors, you will lose everything. Step down, Ethan. Save what little dignity you have left." He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. "If you think you can use my personal life to take this company, you have underestimated me." Outside the glass walls of the conference room, Maya waited. When Ethan emerged, she saw the exhaustion shadowing his face. "What did they say?" she asked quietly. "They want me out," he said. "Rebecca is threatening to expose the contract." "Oh." Maya's hands tightened around the folder she carried. "Then let them. You have nothing to be ashamed of." He shook his head. "If this goes public, it will destroy the company. My father's legacy will collapse. Everything I have fought for will vanish." Maya stepped closer. "Ethan, you are not your father's legacy. You are your own." He looked at her then, really looked at her. The woman who had started as a stranger now stood with fierce loyalty in her eyes. For a moment, he forgot every rule he had made to keep his heart locked. That evening, the storm outside the mansion matched the storm within. Maya found him on the balcony again, rain soaking through his shirt. "You will get sick," she said, stepping out with an umbrella. He turned toward her, the rain tracing lines down his face. "I have already lost everything that matters." "That is not true," she said softly. "You still have a chance to tell the truth before she does." "Hello." Ethan's voice cracked, rare and raw. "You would let the world know that our marriage was a contract? You would face that humiliation with me?" Maya's eyes glistened. "I would rather stand beside you in truth than hide behind a lie." He stared at her, the air thick with rain and emotion. Then, without another word, he reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined, cold and trembling, but certain. The next morning, the shareholders gathered for the emergency meeting Rebecca had called. Cameras flashed. Reporters lined the hallway. Ethan entered the room holding Maya's hand. When the questions began, he raised a hand for silence. "You want the truth? Here it is. Our marriage began as a contract. I made that choice to meet a clause in my father's will. But somewhere along the way, the deal changed. It became something real. She became real." Gasps rippled through the room. Rebecca stood frozen, her plan collapsing in front of everyone. Ethan continued, "If you wish to remove me, do so. But I will not apologize for finding integrity in the middle of deceit. The company will survive because it deserves leadership built on honesty." He turned to Maya, his voice softening. "Thank you for teaching me that." When the meeting ended, the board voted to keep him as CEO. The scandal turned into a redemption story within hours. Headlines read, "CEO confesses contract marriage. Public praises his honesty." That night, back at the mansion, Maya stood by the fireplace, still processing everything. Ethan walked in quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "You were right," he said, handing her one. "Telling the truth feels lighter." Maya smiled faintly. "It always does." He hesitated, then added, "The contract ended today. But if you will stay, not because of rules, not because of money, but because of us. I would be grateful." Maya looked into his eyes, the same blue she had once found cold and unreachable. "I think I already decided that," she whispered. The rain had stopped outside, and for the first time, the house felt like a home. The contract that began with paper and signatures had become something that no legal document could define: trust, forgiveness, and love. Days after the storm of the board meeting, peace seemed to return, but it was a fragile kind of peace. The company's reputation recovered faster than anyone expected. Investors called it the most honest press conference in years. Ethan's leadership was praised, his integrity applauded. Yet inside the Blake mansion, silence hung heavier than before. Maya could feel the space between them again. Ethan worked long hours, staying late at the office until dawn. He said it was to rebuild trust with the shareholders, but Maya sensed something deeper. He was retreating, hiding behind work the way he used to hide behind pride. One evening, she found him in his study, surrounded by papers and cold coffee. "You have been home for 3 days without sleeping," she said. "You cannot rebuild the world in a week." He looked up, his eyes tired. "I have to prove that what I said was not just a speech. Words mean nothing without action." Maya crossed her arms gently. "And what about proving it to yourself?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. "What do you mean?" "You keep punishing yourself for a mistake that is already forgiven," she said softly. "You told the truth, Ethan. You faced them. But now you are running from me." Her words struck him deeper than he expected. "I am not running," he said. She looked at him quietly. "Then why do I feel like you are halfway gone?" For a long moment, neither spoke. The ticking clock was the only sound. Finally, Ethan stood and walked toward the window. "When I admitted everything, I thought I had freed us both. But the more I think about it, the more I realize I used you. I dragged you into a world that never wanted you." Maya stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "You did not drag me. I chose to stay. I knew what I was walking into. What hurts me is not the world outside, Ethan. It is you keeping me outside of your world." He turned to face her, conflict written across his expression. "I do not know how to be with someone who sees me as more than what I own. Every person in my life has wanted something." "Then maybe you should start by believing that I do not," she said. Her words settled in the room like a quiet challenge. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hands falling to his sides. "You deserve more than I know how to give." Maya smiled faintly, though her eyes shimmered. "Maybe I deserve the chance to decide that myself." She turned toward the door, pausing for a heartbeat. "I will not stop caring for you, Ethan, but I will not stand still waiting for you to believe you are worthy of being loved." When she left, the echo of her footsteps felt like the sound of something breaking. Ethan stood alone, staring at the door, realizing too late that silence could be more painful than truth. That night, he walked through the empty halls of the mansion, the same halls that once felt grand but now only echoed her absence. Her room light was off, her sketchbook gone from the table. On the nightstand, she had left the note she once found from him, the one that said, "Talking makes time less heavy." Underneath, she had written one new line, "But only if both people are willing to speak." Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, holding the note, the weight of regret pressing down on him. He finally understood that the fight he had feared losing, the company, the fortune, the name, was never the one that truly mattered. Outside, the city glowed faintly beneath the rain. Somewhere out there, Maya was learning to breathe again, to paint again, to remember who she was before the contract began. And for the first time, Ethan Blake realized that love, no matter how real, cannot live behind walls of fear. It must be chosen, spoken, and fought for, or it slips quietly away, leaving only the sound of rain against glass. 2 weeks passed without a word between them. Maya had left the Blake mansion quietly, returning to her small apartment near the hospital where her mother continued her recovery. She started working part-time again, painting in the evenings to keep her mind busy. Yet every time she lifted a brush, her thoughts drifted back to him, the man who had once taught her that even broken promises could sound sincere when spoken with guilt. Ethan threw himself into work, but the silence of the mansion was unbearable. Every echo reminded him of what he had lost. He had money, power, and redemption in the eyes of the public, but not in his own heart. His assistant noticed the change. "You have won the hardest battle, sir," he said gently. "But you look like a man who lost something more valuable." Ethan did not answer. He simply stared at the unfinished cup of coffee on his desk, the same brand Maya used to bring him every morning. One evening, while reviewing the company's charity projects, he saw a proposal for an art exhibition titled The Colors of Second Chances. The description mentioned a local artist, Maya Hart. Ethan read the words again and again, his chest tightening. She had signed her name without hesitation, while he was still afraid to face the truth. That night, he called his team and made one quiet request. Book the gallery, sponsor the entire event, but do not tell her I am involved. A week later, the exhibition opened. Maya arrived early, surprised by the crowd. She had never seen her paintings displayed so beautifully. Each piece told a story of healing, of love discovered and almost lost. On the far wall hung a painting of a city skyline at night, a single balcony light glowing in the dark. The plaque beneath it read, "To the man who taught me that honesty is love's truest color." As the event continued, Maya turned and froze. Ethan stood near the entrance, dressed simply. No cameras, no entourage, just him. The world seemed to blur around them. She walked toward him slowly. "You should not be here," she said quietly. "I had to be," he replied, "because everything here, every color, every light, reminds me of what I almost destroyed." Maya hesitated, her heart pounding. "Why now, Ethan?" "Because I finally understand," he said. "I thought saving the company would make me worthy again. But the truth is, the only thing worth saving was you." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then he handed her a small box. Inside was her mother's old necklace, now restored, the chain gleaming new. "I kept it safe," he said. "It reminded me of you, something fragile, but stronger than it looks." Tears welled in her eyes. "You did not have to fix it." "I had to," he said, "because I broke everything else." Around them, the gallery lights dimmed to a warm glow. Maya looked at him, the man who had once hidden behind contracts and fear, now standing open and unguarded. For the first time, she believed him. "I do not know where this leads," she whispered. Ethan took her hand gently. "Then let us find out together." And for the first time in months, she smiled, not because the story was perfect, but because it was finally real. After the gallery night, the city seemed to breathe differently for both of them. For Ethan, every meeting, every conversation felt lighter, as if the weight of years had finally lifted. For Maya, the emptiness she once carried had turned into calm clarity. They began to see each other again, quietly at first coffee on a Sunday morning, walks through the park, dinners without reporters or contracts. The world had already decided they were in love, but for the first time it was actually true. One afternoon, Ethan invited Maya to the company's annual charity banquet, the same event where they had once pretended to be the perfect couple. The invitation felt symbolic, a full circle. Maya hesitated at first. "You are sure it is a good idea?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Last time, we showed them a lie. Maybe this time, we can show them the truth." When she arrived that night, the ballroom glowed in gold and crystal again. But this time, it felt warmer, less intimidating. Maya wore a simple silver gown, elegant and understated, her mother's restored necklace resting against her skin. When Ethan saw her from across the room, he stopped mid-sentence. For a moment, time folded back to the first day he saw her in that small cafe, the same quiet strength, the same honesty in her eyes. During the dinner, the master of ceremonies announced an unexpected donation from the Blake Foundation. Ethan stood, took the microphone, and looked out at the crowd. "A year ago," he began, "I made decisions out of fear. I treated people like pieces on a board and called it business. But tonight is not about that. Tonight is about what love can rebuild when pride steps aside." He turned to Maya. "This foundation will fund art programs for underprivileged youth, starting with one project created by the artist who taught me the difference between appearance and truth, Maya Hart." Applause filled the hall. Maya's eyes widened as Ethan motioned for her to join him on stage. She shook her head slightly, overwhelmed, but he extended his hand until she took it. As she stood beside him, he spoke again, his voice steady and full. "You once told me that honesty makes love real. So tonight, I will be honest. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance to build something honest with you, without contracts, without rules. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was not a diamond ring, but a thin gold band, simple, meaningful. The first time I asked you to marry me, it was a deal. Now, it is a choice. The ballroom fell silent. Maya looked at him, tears glimmering beneath the lights. Her voice trembled, but her answer was clear. Then I choose this. I choose us. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and the applause returned, louder, warmer, filled with joy that felt real. Later that night, as they stepped out onto the same balcony where their story had begun, the city lights shimmered below them. Ethan turned to her and said quietly, "No more rules, Maya, just love." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Then let that be the only promise we ever need." And for the first time, neither of them felt like they were pretending to belong because they finally did. Months later, spring returned to New York City. The gray clouds that once hung over Ethan's life had lifted, replaced by the quiet rhythm of peace. The Blake Foundation's art program had launched successfully, and Maya's gallery became its beating heart. Children, students, and young artists filled the once-empty studio with color and laughter. Ethan visited often, not as the powerful CEO, but as a man who had learned how to listen. One afternoon, Maya stood near the window of the gallery, sunlight spilling across her canvas. When Ethan arrived, she smiled, her eyes warm and steady. "You are late," she said playfully. He shrugged lightly. "Meetings never end, but this place reminds me why they matter." She handed him a small sketchbook. On the first page, she had drawn two hands, clasped together hers, and his beneath the simple words, "New Deal." Ethan traced the lines with his thumb. "You turned our story into art," he said quietly. "It is not art," she replied. "It is a promise." Oh. They walked through the gallery together. The walls were filled with pieces that told stories of hope, forgiveness, and beginnings. Each one carried a trace of their journey, the balcony, the rain, the light. When they reached the last painting, Ethan stopped. It showed a city skyline glowing at sunset, two small figures standing on a rooftop. The title read, "The Best Mistake We Ever Made." Ethan laughed softly. "That is how you see us?" Maya nodded. "We began as a mistake, Ethan, but every choice since then was ours." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Then let us keep choosing." Outside, the city hummed with life. The wind carried the scent of spring, warm and full of promise. Ethan took her hand, and they stepped out onto the street, blending into the crowd like two ordinary people. There were no cameras, no contracts, no conditions, only two souls who had found their way back to what was real. As they walked away, Maya whispered, "Do you ever wonder what your father would say if he saw us now?" Ethan smiled gently. "He would say I finally understood what inheritance truly means." And with that, they disappeared into the glow of the setting sun, leaving behind the story of a contract that turned into a confession that turned into love, and a love that no longer needed rules to survive.